Hello and welcome to COMM 101 Online. It's me, Sam, here to teach you Chapter 14, Connecting Through Participating in Groups and Teams. Let's get started. Let's begin with defining what a group is. So basic definition, it is going to be a collection of individuals. And these individuals influence one another, have a common purpose, take on roles, are interdependent, and interact together. So take this definition and try to apply it to past groups you worked in, whether it's at school or at work or extracurricular activities. What we see here is instead of having an individual's interest be the only thing that's considered, the rest of the group now has to be considered. Their interest to make a common purpose a reality by taking on roles, working together, and interacting with each other. There are several different types of groups that make up our lives, such as primary groups. So these groups focus on social and interpersonal relationships. Usually they're long-term, so think family, roommates, friends, and they're usually for enjoyment, companionship, support. So kind of juxtapose this with required groups such as a school project. A primary group is more about the individual's choice, the individual's interest in being in a group with their family members, with their roommates, with their friends. Secondary groups exist to accomplish tasks and achieve goals. They're formed for the purpose of doing work, can help members achieve primary needs of socialization, so think school groups or work groups. We have different layers of groups depending on what needs need to be met at that time. So that primary group is going to be what you're born into, who you choose to be in a group with, where secondary groups could be something that is chosen for you or that you need to do to accomplish something. Interdependence is a term that we've been seeing a lot throughout the semester, and it's really important to really understand what it is. So interdependence is a mutual dependence of members on one another. So the opposite of interdependence is going to be independence. So independent meaning being able to work by yourself, by oneself. Interdependence means that you are also depending on others. And this is an essential trait that you need to have when working in a group, to be able to be comfortable with working with others and realizing that you can't do everything by yourself and that you shouldn't, especially if it's a task that requires several people. So interdependence is important to understand when working with a group because it's also going to reflect in all other group characteristics. If you want to be able to have a successful group, showing interdependence allows a moment for trust to be built and for others to realize, hey, we should also be characterizing interdependence so we can all work together. So interdependence comes into play heavily in groups because that is what's going to make working together as a group successful. Commitment is very essential to group work, because this also lends to the trust building and forming a group that is strong and can work together. So commitment here is going to be the desire of members to work together to complete a task to satisfaction of the entire group. This often stems from members' interpersonal attraction. So remember, this isn't it has to be like a intimate attraction. It can be someone who's attracted to a personality or a work ethic. So this commitment is going to be based on how these group members are working together. Are they showing interdependence? Are they showing commitment to the group? Are they all on the same page? And this is crucial to the effectiveness and success because the work being done in a timely manner, being done effectively and to the standards that it needs to be done is going to be dependent whether or not there was commitment to get the task done and to get it done right. I'm sure we've all been in groups where there's been members who are more committed than others, and so you're kind of picking up the slack of others who aren't as committed. And that's why commitment's really important for the whole group to understand. So there isn't those members that aren't pulling their weight or doing the work that they need to do to help the group be successful. Cohesiveness is the attraction group members feel for one another. It aids into the loyalty and willingness to stick together, to work together, and to be on the same page to make sure that work is getting done in a satisfactory way. However, too much cohesiveness can lead to conformity and unwillingness to change if too strong. So cohesiveness is generally beneficial. Working together, things are smooth sailing, everything's going good until it gets a little too comfortable. And then things start to slide. People aren't as strict, deadlines aren't getting met. So being cohesive needs to be monitored in order to be able to for a group to be at their most successful. Of course, you want to be cohesive, you want to be friends with your group members, but also keeping in mind the goals that are set in place for that group making sure that that friendship or cohesiveness doesn't get in the way for the end goal. When forming a group, there's going to be a group culture that forms, and group culture is a pattern of values, beliefs, norms, and behaviors. And we can take this idea of group culture to several different layers. So we can do a small group, so something you would do in school, to like a culture. So for example, we have American culture, where we have certain societal constructs, we've talked about that before, which are going to be values, beliefs, and norms, and we expect people to follow those norms because that is what the group does, and because that's what we feel is going to be the most successful, what's going to lead to peace and order. So we also have punishments for group culture norms being violated in order to keep the group culture the way we have expected it to be. And we assume that this is shared by all members of the group, and it shapes the group's individual personality. We have views of other cultures and what they're like, or other individuals, or even different kind of like, imagine cliques in high school. When you see a group, you have put together stereotypes, you have gauged their personality, and they have their own values, beliefs, norms, and behaviors that they feel need to be met in order for that group culture to remain how it's supposed to be. And what's interesting is that this is constantly changing because everything is changing all the time. Meaning changes, new things are implemented, and technology plays a huge role in this. So groups are going to change whether or not how much power they have, how they act, how they're able to act. It's always going to be fluid because things don't stay the same forever. So it only makes sense that groups and the group culture is going to evolve with the times. And this leads nicely into group norms. So it kind of ties back into that group culture of the pattern of values, beliefs, and norms. And those norms are expected and shared ways in which members are to behave. And these can be guidelines that are both informal or formal. So things that are kind of expressed strategically. So maybe writing down what expectations the group has for each other, or informal. So kind of understanding the space you're in, making those assumptions of, okay, this is probably how I should act in this group. This is my role. And it's important for members to establish these norms together, because if some group members have certain norms and the rest of the group members have others, that's going to affect the cohesiveness and the interdependence. So establishing group norms and expectations for that group is going to be essential for that group's success. And then we have leading a group or team. So tying in all of this into leadership. So leadership is going to be the influence process. It includes any behaviors that help clarify a purpose or guide a group to achieve its goals. While a leader is a person who is assigned, selected, or emerges to take leadership role of a group or team. And it's important to understand the differences in these, because not all leaders practice leadership, and not all those who practice leadership are leaders. I think the key word here in the leadership definition is guide. So it's not about dictating, it's about guiding the group to do what they need to do to meet their goals, to keep people on the same page. We often see trouble when people start to label themselves as leader because, power can get to people's heads. So by looking at these terms, we can see that they don't have to necessarily be one with each other. There can be one without the other. And so when dealing with leadership, either with you as a leader or following a leader, you can really start to understand with these terms whether or not someone views themselves as a leader while maybe not using leadership to guide their group in a successful way. And maybe there's someone in a group that is providing leadership without having or needing to be named a leader. And for those leading a group or team, task and maintenance needs need to be considered. So first, when you are putting a group together, that is called the initiating phase. So you are initiating the group being together. Maybe this is where introductions happen. Then you're organizing, starting to make plans for what the goal of the group is. You're maintaining effective interactions, so exchanging numbers and emails, and making sure that communication is happening consistently throughout the group. Then you have ensuring member satisfaction, so checking in with the group members, making sure that everyone, again, is on the same page, is happy where things are going, is happy with how the group culture and dynamic is, and facilitating understanding, so making sure everyone understands what the group goal is and where they are and why they're doing it. Meanwhile, stimulating creativity and critical thinking. And this is important, especially for all group members. So making sure that everyone has a voice, everyone's feeling like they can express their ideas, because that's not only going to be successful for the individuals making up the group, making them feel included and important, but it's also going to help the group as a whole and the goals, because new ideas are being included. There's going to be a different creative process. So depending on how much creativity and critical thinking is being included in a group is always going to impact how that project or end goal is going to be impacted. So these are some important terms that you're going to want to know for the exam. We have leadership styles and behavior. So these are the three, usually these are the three most talked about when it comes to leadership and power distribution. So first we have the autocratic leader. So this is a leadership style characterized by individual control over all decisions and little input from group members. Autocratic leaders typically make choices based on their ideas and judgments and rarely accept advice from followers. So this kind of leadership, you're going to want to think dictator. So famous dictators all over the world kind of share these characteristics. It is about their decisions. They're not going to be super receptive of advice from followers, especially when they think that their choices are the choices that should be made and should be followed. Then we have a democratic leader, and this is where individuals who would typically be considered unequal by hierarchical standards have shared power in making decisions. So democratic leaders emphasize collaboration and the free flow of ideas. So it's kind of the society that we're supposed to have. So voting, everyone's voice is supposed to be heard to an extent, at least, hopefully. But everyone's voice is supposed to be included, especially when it comes to making decisions. And I always mess up the pronunciation of this, but I think it's the laissez-faire or laissez-faire leader. And this is a leadership style in which leaders are hands-off and allow group members to make the decisions. Researchers have found that this is generally the leadership style that leads to the lowest productivity among group members, but it's usually one of the highest when it comes to group satisfaction. An example that comes to mind with this leadership style, I believe it's in like Sweden, but it's definitely European. A lot of like their preschools, the teachers are just there to just make sure that no one gets hurt, to make sure no one gets lost. But the kids, like we're talking like toddlers to like age 5, kind of just do what they want. And it's been shown through studies that these kids have a lot of skills that children who don't share that same experience don't have. So resourcefulness or independence, things like that. Also happiness is like off the charts with these preschools because these kids have a really hands-off leadership environment. Teachers are there to help them when they need it, but they're not being dictated, like their decisions aren't being made for them. And so that provides a really different outlook when it comes to leadership and group dynamics. But it's also important to understand the negative impacts or maybe the less desirable impacts that a hands-off leadership style can make. And that's why we're looking over these, because there's going to be different situations that call for different leadership styles. So none of these are like bad or necessarily the best. All of these are different types of leadership styles that might have a role for a certain situation. And the next big part is going to be the contributions of the group members. So leaders and members must recognize and handle counterproductive contributions. Everyone has a role to fill. Everyone has responsibilities, and being a group member or leader doesn't make someone less than or their responsibilities less worthy. Everyone just has a role to fill. Group members are often the ones who bring up issues of conflict that need to be discussed or handled. And group members, this is just another contribution they can have, is reviewing the agenda beforehand. So making sure that the group members are being heard as a whole to whoever might be in terms of leadership or running the show. So it's important for group members to be able to use their voice so that their needs are being met and that they're being heard. Roles of group members include group task roles to help accomplish the objective. So there's tons of different roles that group members can have. And again, it's going to depend on the project. It's going to depend on the group. It's going to depend on the leadership. But each member in the group should have a role or task to complete. And group building and maintenance roles help define the group's social atmosphere. So how that group has bonded with each other. Is there that cohesiveness? Are they working together? Do they want to work together? And if they don't, what can you do to make that something that is happening? These are all roles of group members to be able to make this group the most cohesive and make the goal something that is obtainable and completed to the satisfaction of the entire group. Something that happens a lot in groups is not being able to come to a consensus, because we all come from different backgrounds and we have different ideas of how leadership in groups should be conducted or should work together. So we must think about when there is a conflict or disagreement that there needs to be a goal to arrive at an agreed upon decision that everyone can feel happy with. So all members should have equal opportunity to express opinions and influence outcome. There should be equal share of influence and power and voice heard throughout the group so everyone feels like they're important and included. And something to avoid, and this is an important term, is groupthink. So this is the practice of thinking or making decisions as a group in a way that discourages creativity or individual responsibility. So consider this being like when you can just take the easy route out instead of taking the time and finding out individuals' ideas and really encouraging that creativity and that critical thinking. So it's kind of like when someone says something and you just agree with it because it's the easy thing to do. And when you work in a group, sometimes the easiest thing isn't always the best thing to do, especially depending on what the goal is for that group. We've talked about conflict in interpersonal communication, and now we're going to be specifically discussing it through group communication. So conflict is inevitable, but it can be productive. Communication behavior is a vehicle for conflict management. So conflict happens because of communication, and we're talking verbal and nonverbal. So if communication is the vehicle for conflict management, it is also going to be the vehicle for conflict resolution. Open disagreement is important in decision making because, again, it's going to help avoid that group think of just taking the easy way out without voices being heard. Instead, we're discussing what the problems are. What are the solutions to these problems? Does everyone have a different idea to what a solution could be? And then discovering those solutions and seeing if they will work for that group dynamic. Principled negotiation helps negotiate consensus. So reaching a gradual consensus on a joint decision efficiently and amicably focuses on basic interests, mutually satisfying options, and fair standards typically results in a wise agreement. So while conflict is inevitable, making it productive is going to make sure that you handle conflict in a way where everyone's voices and interests and wants are heard in order to come up with a consensus that everyone feels is beneficial, not only to them, but to the group as a whole. After conflict, these are some of the positive possible outcomes. It could produce better understanding of issues and people. So what people's needs are might come through conflict if those needs aren't being met. It can increase member motivation. So seeing that your voices and issues and concerns are being heard and hopefully being solved can increase the motivation and that cohesiveness. It can produce better decisions because people are working together to come up with a solution. It's not just one person defaulting to a solution that may not benefit the entire group. And it can produce greater cohesiveness among members, building strength and trust within the group members, especially if there's a common understanding of the expectations. And if there's issues, seeing that those issues were resolved and working together for the common good of the group. Ethical behavior and conflict is something that is really important to establish in the beginning of a group. Ethics are going to vary depending on your background, your interests, beliefs, etc. But kind of going back to that group culture and the group norms, it's important to collaborate and understand what ethical behavior and conflict not only means to you, but to your group. And when it comes to conflict, especially in ethical behavior, there's a few things that you want to make sure that you're doing so you can avoid something that be harmful to individuals in the group and the group as a whole. So first, you want to make sure that you base disagreements on solid evidence and logic. So not rumors, not guesses. You want to make sure that you have a basis, especially if you're going to be confronting someone or a situation. Be receptive to disagreements, especially if you're a leader. Don't consider it as an attack. Be receptive to feedback, to criticism, to disagreements, and you will often see that there is something stronger and greater that can come out of that. Remaining calm is, of course, super essential to conflict. Remaining calm in a situation of conflict can really create beneficial results instead of things being heated and emotional. Integrate ideas and negotiate when possible. You might want to feel like rigid when it comes to what you want, but being flexible to other people's ideas to make sure that they're feeling heard or to solve a conflict that can, in the end, be beneficial to the relationships that are being built and the group. Then start getting comfortable with ideas of being flexible and negotiating conflict situations. When discussing problems and solutions, we can refer to Dewey's reflective thinking model. Number one is going to be clearly identify or define the problem. What this does is it makes sure that you don't veer off into other problems or situations. Make sure you spend time on each problem. So clearly identifying what the first problem or what the problem is. First, make sure people are on the same page and that they understand what's being discussed. And second, helps make sure that that problem gets resolved before moving on to the next one. Number two is analyzing the problem. So how did it start? Why did it start? Who was involved? Things like that. Number three is suggesting possible solutions. So there doesn't have to be one solution that is offered. Getting as many solution ideas as possible is always going to be more beneficial in a group so people feel like they have options. Then number four, selecting the best solution, and this can be done through consensus. So most often it's going to be through a vote, or if people aren't happy with the solution, seeing where you can put in that flexibility in that negotiation. And then lastly, decide how to implement the solution. So not only just talking about the issue, but how are we going to implement the solution? How is this conflict going to be solved? What are the steps, and how are we going to make sure that it gets done? And there are several advantages to working with groups. I know a lot of us aren't a big fan of working in groups because we can trust ourselves to get tasks done the way we want them to get done. But there is a reason why in school, especially, that we work together in groups. It's practice for the real world and practice for developing skills that are essential in functioning in the workplace and school and just interpersonal relationships in general. So one of those is helping satisfy psychological and social needs. Humans are social creatures, so being able to work in groups kind of meets those needs, or at least helps get some of those needs met, not all of them. It can help people achieve goals. So some things that you may not be able to do by yourself as an individual, you might be able to complete as a group. It can provide multiple sources of information and knowledge, so not just relying on what you come in with, but getting other ideas, other opinions, other people's experiences and knowledge that you may have otherwise never have received. And it can contribute to the individual's positive social identity. So in the last unit, we talked about perception, especially individual perception. And there was that model where we talked about where our social identity is usually formed through interactions that we have with other people. And then we kind of analyze that, and then it affects how we present ourselves again. And working with groups is a huge part of that. So instead of just these one-on-one interactions, instead, some of your social identity can be formed and established through groups. But there are also several disadvantages to working in small groups. The first is that groupthink. So the whole point of groups is to be able to work together and share different ideas. So when we have groupthink, which is defaulting just to what everyone else is saying or the easiest option, that's when the benefits of group work really isn't being met. We also have it's time consuming. We have all worked in groups. We know how annoying and time consuming it can be to meet up or to collaborate when it comes to who does what and communicating with that. So it's very time consuming, especially compared to working as an individual where you know your time, how much time you should put into something and how much you're willing to put into something. There's varying communication styles. So you might have like two people who want to lead the group, or you might have a lot of people who might be social loafers. So people who don't do anything. And communication styles are really important to establish in a group so that communication can flow. Social loafing is members not doing their fair share of work, basically just chilling instead of working. Those people who are just kind of like, yeah, sure, whatever. They're usually big proprietors of groupthink. There's also the pressure to fail because you're relying on other people to help you with a grade, especially if it's in school. You have to trust individuals with something that could be essential to your success. And because it's not just relying on your input and your work, there's a lot of stress that comes with that. And then we have the group hate phenomenon. And literally it's just, you hate it. You hate working in groups. And that is something that comes with kind of like a stigma. It's usually based on past experiences. So when you hear the word group or group work, it kind of brings in all those bad past memories. So these are some of the disadvantages. So knowing these is helpful so you can maybe avoid them or be able to point them out when you are working in a group. Evaluation is a step that is usually forgotten or not really discussed when it comes to group work. The group is responsible for its own successes and failures. Yes, there's outside factors, but all in all, the group is going to be responsible depending on the communication and the work that was put in, whether or not they succeeded or failed. And it's a responsibility of the group to fix its own problems. Every group should evaluate effectiveness periodically. So making sure that everyone in the group is feeling like they're on task, that things are going well, that their voices are being heard, and then seeing what the findings of that evaluation, and it must be made to all. And what that does is it makes sure people are on the same page, that the group is still going in the right direction, and that people are enjoying the process. And this is a huge step in how we kind of change how we view group work, is by checking in. How is this group performing? Are we doing what we need to do? And are people enjoying the process? And by doing that, again, voices are heard. And when our voices are heard, we feel like we're being included. And when that happens, we're more willing to be trusting and being more cohesive and working together with other people. That's the end of this lecture. Make sure you do the discussion board assignment. Also remember that persuasive speech outlines were due on Sunday. So if you haven't done those, you really need to turn that in as soon as possible. And everyone should begin getting started on their persuasive speech first draft. Remember, if you did not do a visual aid for your informative speech, you do need to have a visual aid for your persuasive speech. The example is still on Blackboard if you needed to refer to it to see what the expectations are. If you have any questions or concerns when it comes to the class or anything personal or individual, or when it comes to an assignment or anything like that, please reach out. I would be more than happy to chat with you. I hope everyone is doing well, and I will talk to you in the next lecture. And remember, communication is always happening and always has meaning.